before I appreciated these magic things more, that things just work. Nowadays, I like explicitness more.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to Kodsnack. I'm Fredrik, and today I'm joined by Balint. Welcome.
Thank you.
Who are you? What do you do?
So I'm Balint. I've been doing web development, I think at this point, for more than two decades. Yeah, around 2 decades. And I kind of divided, not intentionally, these 2 decades. Like half of it was backend development, and then I switched to front-end development, which we'll talk more about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm a web guy. Like, I really think the web is an amazing platform.
Yeah.
And stuck with it.
People complain a lot, but there's so much fun to be had, I feel.
Absolutely, yeah. And there are just so many new things coming out. Although I guess that's true for everything related to software.
Yeah, of course.
But the web has, many, novelties, many new tools and frameworks popping up.
Yeah. So I guess if you go back 2 decades, and it's slightly different backend technologies than today, I suppose.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Where did you start?
I graduated in 2001, I think, from university. And then my first job was at a very small company. We did e-commerce shops for Logitech. Like, Logitech was our biggest client.
Ah, wow.
And they used like a templating language called JSP, Java Server Pages.
Oh, yeah. I did that a bit at my first job.
That was nice. And I don't even know what we use for backend. So there was some Java on the backend, but there was also something, slightly unusual in the backend. So it wasn't, PHP or something.
Something else.
Yeah. So I did not a lot of, but I did a few years of PHP. And then I switched to actually Python. And we used, that was another small company. And we used ZODB, like some object-related or object database. I think the ODB stood for object database. I don't recall what the Z stood for. And we used Python, and that was great. But then I learned about this language called Ruby, which I think was like relatively new at the time. And I just really fell in love with it. Like, it had a lot of things that Python had, but I found it was even more pleasurable to work with. Like, it was more consistent. Like, everything was an object.
Yeah.
In Python, you had these statements, which are just statements for no good reason. I mean, that's, of course, just a matter of taste. But then I really got into Ruby. I think I attended my first tech conference in Prague about Ruby. And then Rails, and then I left that company and started freelancing. So at this point, I don't know, it could have been in 2008, something like that.
I mean, I remember Ruby had such an amazing headwind of support, and like people really falling in love with the language as well.
Yes, exactly. Like,
that real expression of joy was incredible, and also it seemed like you could really get a lot of stuff done really quickly.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like, Ruby has never been a fast language, or didn't even try to be, I think, the fastest language, but I think that was okay.
Yeah.
Like, that was
really aware of its trade-offs.
Yes, exactly. And I think that sparked the discussion of how important it is to be fast. Like, because there is, developer speed, like how fast you can develop something in that language and how good you feel while developing, like, because that can also add to your productivity.
Yeah.
And at the same time, how fast the language is going to be when it runs on the server, which is another topic, and, the trade-off between these two.
Oh, yeah. So might Rails have had something to do with you, like moving from back into front end? Or was that a separate...
You mean, was that the first thing that moved me towards the front end? Yeah, it's a good question. I think it could have been. Yeah, I mean, Rails was, I was about to say, even better than Ruby, but of course it was built in Ruby. So but it was really nice to have something, which like covered all the needs of web applications.
Yeah,
like that was at least it definitely was the first such tool for me. Which that was the only thing that was needed to develop like a very flashy web application.
Yeah, and that also really feels like it struck a much more general nerve or need, because Rails has been one of those things that, the ideas seem to start moving into every other framework using every other language. Like, yeah, this is Rails-like in this way or that way.
Yes.
But I don't know what's a good way of describing roughly what Rails did in a unique way for developers today, if you haven't heard of Rails before.
Well, the one big idea, I think, was convention over configuration. That's the...
Oh, yeah, that's where that started.
I mean, one big thing was the thing that we talked about, I think, which is, you had just one thing that you could develop your whole application in. And you also didn't have to, really know the nitty-gritty of, the underlying things that you used. It's always useful. But for example, it had an ORM, active record. It still has an ORM.
Oh, yeah.
And so you didn't really need to be able to write like data query or SQL statements, SQL queries, which, I mean, again, I think it's good. It's useful if you as a developer know how to, like refine, for example, SQL queries. But it's an advantage if your framework takes care of that, and you only have to dive deeper if you needs to enhance the performance or understand something like a bug deep down somewhere.
Yeah. And
then yes, convention over configuration, I think, was a totally new idea at the time, which is you shouldn't have to configure again. I think it kind of relates to this other thing that I just said. So you shouldn't have to know the intricate details of, the database, all the different tools, maybe the bundling tool that you use, but that the framework should take care of it. Or even, just where certain files are. I think that's the other thing that might have been new at the time, that, you put your models in app/models, and then they are going to be picked up. You configured your routes in config/routes RB, that kind of thing. So there's a place for everything, and it just works.
Yeah, it's a big thing when it works nicely.
Exactly. Yeah. And that appealed to me.
Yeah, it makes sense. I've never actually done much. I've written a little bit of Ruby, but very, very little. So I've never tried Rails myself. But I mean, it's not too late. It's still out there.
It's still out there. That's the other thing. It aged, I think, really well, and it's still. I think it's really slick even today. And and I think even there is a lot of innovation regarding Rails. Like, it's not just this old framework that's still sitting around and just you do everything like you did 10 years ago. So it constantly changes, keeps changing. Yeah, I'm not following it as much as I did back then, but from time to time I see news and then I read a few articles about it.
Yeah, but something you are following is another one of those frameworks that has been, I mean, it's been around for quite a long while now.
Oh yeah.
And I haven't used it personally, but I get the feeling that it's also been pretty influential, even though maybe not everyone has been using it, and that's Ember.
Yeah.
Which I thought we would talk about today. Yeah. So where to start? Where does, I mean, Ember is a web framework. Where does it come from? Maybe that's a starting point.
Yeah, it's a front-end framework. Actually, Rails, I think, carried me over to Ember in a way, because I worked at a startup for 2.5 years, and then I left that startup, and then that was like the winter of 2013. So I didn't instantly rush to a new job. So I was just looking around, and that was the era when these front-end frameworks, started coming to existence.
Yeah.
And by front-end frameworks, I mean, there were just two of them at the time. It was Angular and Ember. And I was, just pondering which one to start learning.
Yeah.
One of the authors of Ember was Yehuda Katz, who was instrumental to Rails.
Yeah.
And before another framework called Merb, but yeah, Rails. And so I think I just judged Yehuda's judgments on how to, I thought that whatever framework he comes up with must have, good fundamentals.
Oh yeah. I trust his judgment.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense. A lot of sense.
So that's why I started learning Ember. And that was a very tumultuous time for Ember because it still wasn't 1.0 even at the time.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
It had these 0.dev versions or beta versions, and documentation was out of date for a good reason because like things change, every month. So if there was some documentation, it was out of date, the next month. So I started learning it, and I really liked it. Like right at the start, I had kind of like a crush, like the same way as I had for Rails. Yeah. And I actually got contracted for a job that used Ember. So I was learning on the job, reading on the side. And then on that same, so I think it was summer 2013, there was the first Ember Fest, which was a European Ember Conf at the time. And I attended with a few friends. It was in Munich. And then I remember on the train back home, I kind of decided that, okay, I want to, step up my game. And actually, I was full of motivation, from the conference, as it usually happens. Yeah. So I wanted to spread the word about Ember and how great it is. So I started a screencast series. And once that was out, I started writing articles. Yeah. And then I kept this on. Like I kept it on for, I think, more than a year. Like I wrote an article every week for a year or so.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Cool. And during that journey, at one point, I realized that I had, half of a book. So, and that led me to write a book. I think I probably overestimated that half a book was already done because it's always more work and a bit different.
That seems to be what everyone who has written a book says.
Yeah, exactly.
I overestimated it quite a bit.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the way. Yeah, I'm hoping we'll get to the book a bit more later on. So what was sort of special about Ember, or what kind of thoughts and ideas did it have back then that appealed? Except for not being Angular, which could be a big thing for some people. I understand.
I think it was at the time, at least, it was really similar to Rails in a few ways, and one of them was again convention over configuration. So you didn't have to, configure every last detail of the app. There was a very well defined structure for Ember apps. You knew where to look for certain things. The same way you wanted to see the routes of an app, it was in a certain file, and things were, just working. You didn't have to write that much code. That was the other thing. Like a lot of boilerplate was, generated for you behind the scenes, or things were wired together so that you didn't have to create a file if all that you wanted to write in that file was the default, which made more sense. So again, coming from Rails, I really like that concept that just writing a few lines, a few files, I had, something already working. And at the time, I think it was the first CLI tool that was also included with the framework. So you could, generate things from the command line, like start your server, and everything was very smooth. I mean, you had to know the thing that I mentioned was that Ember was in flux. So it went between, different versions, not even being 1.0.
Yeah.
Like that, those things could change relatively quickly.
Yeah. So it's exciting to already be shipping production code.
Exactly.
Using.
I mean, that 1.0 came out during that first, that conference, the first Ember Fest. So that's, cool. The period that I described as in flux was about 6 months for me. So then things started really settling down.
Yeah, that's not too bad.
It's
well, that's actually really good compared to many frameworks.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So Ember is front end, and did you pair that with like Rails on the back end? Is that sort of a natural combination? Or?
It doesn't really matter, and I think it even didn't matter at the time, what you use for backend. But having said that, a lot of apps use Rails on the backend because a lot of people starting to use Ember had the same trajectory as I did. Like they used Rails, they liked Rails, and then they liked the same concept, so they started using Ember. So a lot of the apps had Rails as the backend.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of under discussed or under thought about in our business. We like talking about like reusing stuff and reusing various ways, but reusing concepts, that's really powerful. And I don't think we talk as much about that doesn't have to be the same language or anything, but if the concepts are similar, I can get into it much quicker.
You mean like, for example, convention over configuration, so these higher level
exactly
things.
Or like you said, like placing stuff in, it sounds like a similar thought about folder structure and stuff like that as well.
Yes.
If I have an idea about where it goes, I can avoid quite a few mistakes along the way.
True.
Yeah. What does Ember sort of give you to start with?
I mean, it gives you what I told is like it gives you a very nice structure, so you can concentrate on what makes your app unique, what you need to use the domain of your app. But it's also one of those like batteries included frameworks, which is also, I think, especially in the front end, it wasn't, and maybe still not is, like a concept that was widely adopted. Now I think it's becoming more and more, because, for example, React, that actually didn't even exist when I started learning about Ember. I think it was born a little bit later, but it didn't exist at the time. So React is like just a view layer, so you needed to pair it with several other things. Ember had the other concept about it, and everything was included from the start. Like Ember data is like, it's a separate package, but it has always been, if you want to use data, you should use Ember. Like if you need a data library, you should use Ember data.
Yeah.
So not all Ember apps use Ember data, but especially at the start, almost all of them did. If they needed this, they needed a heavy, data layer to sit on top, and like everything else has been, and I think still is, included. Which doesn't mean that. Well, I said everything is included. So I'm not saying everything needs to be included or still is in the framework. But if it's not included, then at least what is the default library that people use. So there's some experimentation, and then at the end of the day, the community settles on one solution. Usually that becomes the de facto standard.
Yeah, I mean, that's having worked a lot in React, that's kind of appealing.
Yeah,
you have the view layer, and then there are a million things to choose for this data management part. But everyone usually uses this thing.
Right. Yes. Yeah, exactly.
There's this strange stack of stuff that's on paper completely independent. You can pick whichever you want. It just so happens that everyone picks this.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So of course, this doesn't, apply to everything, but I think it applies to the fundamental things. For example, you can choose whichever CSS library you want.
Makes sense.
Exactly. So I didn't want to overdo it. Like I'm not saying Ember makes you, choose a specific CSS framework. No, but for the things that matter, that it does usually offer a solution.
Yeah. So we interrupt this broadcast with a quick thank you to all our sponsors on Coffee. You too can become one by visiting ko-fi.com/kodsnack, KODSNACK, and making a one-time or monthly donation. If you support us with €5 or more per month, you get some very, very nice stickers in the mail. And if you support us on the barista level for €10 or more per month, you also get a huge thank you right here. Thank you, Andreas Legell, Brother Ingo, and Tobbe Lundberg. And remember, you're a fantastic person whether you support us with money or not. I guess Ember has also had time to evolve quite a bit.
Yeah, that's true.
Since then.
Yeah.
How has it changed over time? Or has it felt the same to work with all the time?
Yeah, that's another, just given the Ember's age, that it started before, if JavaScript became the language, I think the very pleasant language that it is today to work with. At the time when it started, JavaScript didn't have classes. People, take a lot of things for granted.
Yeah.
But that was in 2013. I think Ember started probably 2012, so just 1 year before I became acquainted with it. So, and a lot of things needed to be built into the framework because JavaScript didn't have it. They couldn't use the platform.
Yeah. And or Internet Explorer 6 didn't have it.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's an enormous thing as well that we sort of don't think about anymore.
Good point. Yeah. So, and Ember has this other philosophy that apps, companies, people shouldn't be left behind. So it always provided, a smooth trajectory. There has never been a clear cut, Ember 3 is going to be completely different than Ember 2. It never had that. So if you put these two things together, a lot of, craft, so to speak, is still carried over in old Ember apps. But that's, again, because of the historical, the age. Like there is still, they call those Emberisms. For example, Ember had its own class hierarchy, like an object model hierarchy,
of course.
Because you couldn't just use JavaScript classes.
Yeah.
So
there wasn't any other.
So some of those are still around in older Ember apps. So, but nowadays, like if you just start an Ember app from scratch, it's a very slick, very JavaScript friendly, just using the tools of the wider JS ecosystem. So it's completely different.
But is the feeling the same? Does it feel fun in the same ways that it used to?
That's a good question. I think it is. Like I feel the same enthusiasm in a way. So I still, some of the decisions, baked into the framework are still the same. The tools might have changed, and I think it's a lot more pleasant to write today's JavaScript classes than Ember object.extend.
Yeah, it's a bit cleaner these days.
It's cleaner and but I think the underlying tenets stay the same in a lot of ways. Like one thing that I think I slightly changed my mind on is that you have to be more explicit today in Ember apps. Like for example, there has been historically component templates. So you have component classes, JS, or these days it's other TS classes. And you had component templates, which are HBS files. HBS standing for handlebars, which has been in ancient times, that has been the templating language in Ember. Now it's Glimmer, but you still use HBS. Like you still, your files are still have the HBS extension, and you write. And there's no imports in that file. It's a template file. So, the things that you can use in that template file need to be defined somewhere, but the connection is not visible. Like if you just look at the file, you wonder where each thing is coming from. Like you have each, for example, as a helper, and that's like a globally accessible helper. Nowadays, you have template tag components, which is you have your JS or TS code in the same file as your template. The view, the component's content. It's there's just a template tag, like an HTML tag, that what identifies that this is but everything that you use inside, except for a few built-in helpers, you need to import it from the appropriate package.
Okay, so that's sort of doing things more in a similar way to other big frameworks, it seems like, because that's what everyone was excited and upset about with React. Like, what? I write code in my template, or my template is inside the code. This is so strange.
Yes. Well, you still don't write just arbitrary JavaScript in your template for template text, but anything that so it's more similar, to HTML, let's say. So whatever you see there, I think it's really similar to HTML. Obviously, with those edits, each helpers and helper calls and modifiers and other things. But you look at it, it still looks like you don't have to squint a lot to realize that's still, HTML at the end of the day.
Yeah. And then you have the other logic sort of separate outside of that file.
Yeah, exactly. And you have your JS code, JavaScript code on top, and the imports. So, and I think that's like the thing that I changed my mind on, is that before I appreciated these magic things more, that things just work. Nowadays, I like explicitness more. Like I really like, that everything needs to be imported. So I know, where a certain thing is coming from right away, just by looking at it. I also like that everything is in one file. Like you don't have to switch between JS and HBS files. Oh, yes. I think it's not as big a deal as people would think without trying, but it's still nicer to have everything in one file. And you can even have several components in one file. Yeah.
Keeping things straighter, more explicit. I think I made a similar journey myself. Definitely. So if someone starts looking at Ember now, coming from other major frameworks, is there anything in particular that sort of tends to surprise people or takes a while to get into or is confusing?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, I think if they started using current Ember, so the thing that I just described, like template tag components, not that much. I think Ember really closed the gap between, I like described what Emberism is, like this historical baggage coming with Ember. And I think that made, JavaScript developers, like the learning curve was quite steep because they needed to, come to grips with what all those things are, and somebody needed to explain them or they could look it up. Nowadays, it's a lot closer to other frameworks or just JavaScript. The template itself is different, but it's not a huge jump, I think, from other frameworks like Svelte, for example, SvelteKit. So we need to obviously learn like the syntax of the template and like how reactivity works in the template. So those are different. But you have a lot less things, Ember specific things like controllers, for example, is one such thing which were baked into the framework right from the start, and they are still part of the framework. But if you use this modern Ember, then you don't really need to know what they are.
Okay, so they sort of faded into the background.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
So what do you do? I still have the controller as a concept in my head. What do you do instead, or how do you structure things instead nowadays?
It's just like a top level, like the backing class of the top level component. So if you go, let's say you have a top level path in your application, you are in an application called Albums, for example, you are writing, music app.
Yep.
Albums would be such top level template. It's not a component, it's like a template. And then the component class for this template, which is not a component, would be a controller, right? So that's what you did it historically. But there is now a shift towards that template just being another, top level route template. And then you don't really need to have a separate file for the controller because you can just define everything in the same template. Just as if it was a component, because it is a component.
Okay, so the need
route, the need went away. Yeah, exactly. It's the need that went away. Yeah, but this is still, it's a very, not needing the controller is still a very, very modern thing. Like I think there is an RFC request for it, so it's being built, and you can use it today with an add-on, with a plugin.
Okay, so do people use a lot of plugins in Ember development, or do you mostly stick with the stuff that comes in the box?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Like usually you have plugins, we actually call them add-ons for these new things. So I mentioned before that the community will eventually settle on a shared solution or a big solution, but there is this interim period when people build these add-ons, and then other people will try them and see how that works. Because it's one thing to have, to talk about how something should work and what the syntax is, and it's another thing to actually build something that you can try. That's the best kind of feedback that you can have. So, for example, these route templates, currently you have an RFC, like a very nicely laid out RFC of how that should work, but a plugin, an add-on, has already been available for maybe a few years, maybe a year and something, to not need controllers. So you don't need controllers.
That's cool. So what is it that keeps Ember like appealing and fun for you? I might be an impossible thing to answer, but
it's a tough one because I liked it so much from the start.
Yeah.
But I really like the changes too. I think it's just becoming better and better. So especially that we don't need, a lot of those Ember specific quirks anymore.
Yeah.
I think I like that even more. I think I like it even more because I would hope that then other people would start learning it too.
Yeah.
Because I think, I don't have, a lot of feedback or experience about this, but I think that what has historically kept JavaScript developers from Ember is that it seems so different. why would I go there and learn this completely different thing when I'm familiar with my own little thing, with my own framework? But as I said, I think now it has really approached like Ember syntax and just general usage has approached other frameworks a lot, and just what you're used to, working with JavaScript a lot.
Yeah. So if I'm finishing up a project in some other major framework, are there any particular things which should make me consider Ember for my next thing? I mean, is it just personal appeal, or are there any specific things that's like, this is where Ember really shines in comparison to others?
Yeah, I think the particular sweet spot for Ember might be like bigger, more complex apps, desktop apps. So I think that's where it really shines. I think it can be used for, other things too, like smaller ones.
Yeah.
But a lot of I think the benefits come forth when you have something big. And I think part of the reason is also that, again, the Ember community has this philosophy of not leaving, others behind. So if there is a migration from one syntax to the other, there is usually a code mod, there is usually a very clear path forward.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah. And that's why, I think apps that have started in Ember, even in 2013, are still on Ember.
Yeah.
It's not, it's not a choice for a lot of new apps that spring up, but those that started using Ember at one point still use it.
Yeah.
Obviously not all of them, but a lot of them. You can, I really enjoy, discovering these new Ember apps, because Ember is relatively small compared to other frameworks. So when I come across an app, I'm really, I talk to someone and, wow, you're using Ember. Yeah, we have been using Ember since 2015.
Yeah.
Just,
because
they just didn't tell anyone. It's not like,
Yeah, I mean, that's also so interesting. That was one of the things I was wondering about before, because Ember felt like it really, just like Rails, it had a time where I heard about it a lot, and then things sort of went quiet, and then you wonder, is everyone still working on it and just not talking about it, or has it sort of died down? And it sounds like, people just kept going. They're just not.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah, it's the thing that you just said is very typical to think, oh, is Ember not dead?
Yeah.
No, not at all. Quite the contrary.
Yeah, it keeps on going.
Yeah.
So is there any reason to not use Ember then? It sounds like if you're doing a really small thing, it might not be as necessary.
Yeah, if you're using a really small thing, it might not be. Ember doesn't have like a native story. It doesn't have something like React Native. So if you want one code base for your mobile apps, then probably it's not a good choice. Or you can still build the web application in Ember and then use something else. One company I worked for did exactly that, and it worked great. We used Ember for the front end, the web app, but we had, for the native apps, we had React Native. Yeah. So, but if you want everything together, then
but if everything goes together, it may not end up in a happy place. Anyway, it might be better to pick something that's good at each.
Yeah, that's a good point in my opinion. Yeah, and as you say, I think if it's a really small app, then maybe it's not. Although again, I think as a learning project, something to try Ember out on, it's perfectly fine.
Yeah,
and that is another thing that has been historically, I think, like a weak point of Ember, is that for a long time we didn't have tree shaking, that code elimination, route splitting.
No.
You had, the bundle was pretty huge.
Oh, okay.
And that for some applications that might be, a big disadvantage, that you had to download several megabytes of JavaScript on the first go.
Makes sense.
But then I think probably the most crucial Ember innovation that has happened in the last years is a project called Embroider, which translated Ember apps to just standard JavaScript apps. So we can benefit from using the JavaScript tools of the ecosystem, like Webpack and Mint.
Oh, okay.
Because that started in 2012. I think Ember started in 2012. It had to have its own build system. There was no Webpack, there was no was no Vue. So
it was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago, indeed. So so we just kept going with the old build system, but at one point, we realized, it would be actually great if we didn't have to maintain a separate build system, and we could just, latch the Ember app onto, V2 Webpack, whatever it would be.
Okay.
Yeah. So now it's possible, like the Webpack, integrating Webpack is completely stable, like the version of Embroider that does is completely stable, and Vite has been out in beta for a few months now, I think, like a beginning of summer. So, and it's getting stable very soon too.
So then all your Ember stuff can suddenly be inside of a Vite app as a native part of it.
So Vite builds your Ember app, yes. So you just run Vite. You won't even run a separate Ember. Like a node process, that you would just run Vite, and then your Ember app is going to be served. And
you still write your Ember stuff as
usual. Exactly. You just run Vite instead of.
That's cool.
So that's going to be a big thing. I think that's like the fact that Ember had this huge bundle size, and also the fact that rebuilding your app took a long time.
Okay.
Because again, it was the same old build system. So if you had a big app like rebuilds, you change something, it automatically rebuilds, it reloads your app. That could take a few seconds. On larger apps. It could even go up to 10, 15 seconds, and that's inconvenient.
Yeah.
And the initial build time could take like a minute in some cases, between a minute and 2 minutes. But that is going away. It's already, going away with the Webpack adapter for Embroider. And you can you can chunk up your app into pieces based on the routes that you visit, based on the URL that you visit. So that's, I think, a huge improvement. And I'm very happy to see it shipped.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you said, there's still a lot of development going on.
There is still a lot, and that's a good thing too.
Yeah. This episode of Codsnack is sponsored by Cursed Code, a Halloween-themed half-day conference in Gothenburg on October 31st, 2024. Interesting talks, panel discussions, mingle, and afterward a great dinner at Poppels. The program is for anyone with a relation to software. You definitely don't need to be a programmer to appreciate it. Ola Elnestam will talk about spending 20,000 hours as a code hunter. Gustav Nyberg about the reign of terror of mass surveillance. Rickard Thulin will talk about technical excellence versus business value. And Oskar Olsson asks if pseudocode will mean the death of the programmer. And yes, I will be attending in some form as well. So I would really like to see you there too. Point your browser or curl to cursedcode.se to read more and buy tickets. Hope to see you there, and big thanks to Cursed Code for sponsoring Codsnack. And anything else that's in development right now that you're excited about seeing in the future?
Not so much development. Like the development I'm most excited to see is the Vite, like the Embroider Vite development. But it's related to that is that I think a huge problem for many OS projects is like funding it. Like how do you come up with a model that is sustainable on the long term and is funded by somebody,
exactly.
Company, whatever that would be. Like you have to find a model because you can't rely, on people doing that after the regular work. It's just not maintainable on the long term. And so Embroider, there's a project called the Embroider Initiative, which was started by a consultancy here in Europe called Main Matter. And so companies could chip in, could sponsor this development. And then a few developers could just work on Embroider, full time for maybe a year, maybe between 6 months and a year. I don't know exactly. And that's how, the project really took off and could make the Webpack adapter really solid, and then add the beta version of the Vite adapter.
Yeah.
And now that has been like spurred by the success of this initiative. Now they introduce another initiative called the Ember Initiative. So it's not just
makes sense
one project inside Ember, but let's develop the framework the same way.
Yeah.
Which I think is just exactly what we need, and it's such a good idea. That
so up until now it has been individuals' spare time all the way.
Exactly. Yeah, totally. And I mean, there companies sponsoring the development of the framework by allowing their developers, their employees to work on Embroider. But again, it's not something very concrete. It's not something I think that you can rely on the long term.
Could change any minute.
Exactly.
Really. Yeah. So that's exciting. Let's hope that takes off as much as the Embroider initiative did.
Yeah, I really do hope that.
Put some links in the show notes, of course, if your company wants to sponsor Ember.
Please do.
Yeah, exactly. You should. Oh, you have another interesting point written down here. How new features land in Ember. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, so I hinted at that, is that Ember has a public repository on GitHub called RFCs. So anybody can write up, an RFC, a change they would like to see in the framework. And then there is a period where people just give feedback or, refine their points. And then there is a discussion about, at one point, and we transition to another phase. And then the core team will, discuss whether that can really fit into the framework the way the original thought.
Yep.
And if they give the green light, then it becomes, an accepted RFC. And then somebody still has to do the work of, implementing that change. But then at one point it's going to arrive at the framework. They sometimes, start with writing the add-on that we talked about, so that we don't bake it into the framework right away because it has a high cost. So it's better to just test it out, like in a separate package.
Yep.
But if it makes sense, then it's baked into the framework. And I really like this, this process of being completely transparent and anybody can just join. It's not really a top-down kind of, we want it this way, so it's going to be that way. That also has its advantages, but I think this one, it might be slower, but it has, I think, worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds really well thought out and thorough as well. Once you decide to adopt something, you have a lot of written thoughts about it already and discussions.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. That's definitely one of the advantages. So yeah, I enjoy just poking around and seeing what RFCs, what things are going to arrive at the framework.
Yeah, and see what people wish for, I guess.
Yeah.
So but the core team still sort of retains the final say on what we want to adopt.
Yes, exactly. They can still say no.
Yeah.
Or they can still say maybe not that way. So it's usually it's not a categorical no. But it's like it won't really work this way because such and such.
I mean, I really liked what you said there about, does this sort of fit into the intention or thought of the framework?
Yes.
Because I feel like that's something that can be pretty easy to lose track of. It's like we started with this great idea and then we started building stuff around it, and maybe some of it didn't quite fit, but we'll think about that later. And then you have something that, can't really move anywhere anymore.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So like saying no to stuff that doesn't fit in its current form, that can be really important, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of the like a typical comment there would be, some companies chipping in saying, oh, don't do this because we use this certain thing that you want to phase out all over the place.
Yeah.
And then what happens is that if they see that there's a lot of companies, with the same mentality, with the same problem, then they kind of think even, I think, more thoroughly about what's the path forward. Like, how can we provide, a code mod, some form of help so that they don't have to rewrite everything.
Yeah.
And again, that's really good to see that, people care.
Yeah, exactly. So how large is the core team, by the way?
So there are several core teams. I think we have a lot of them. I think the core team might be, I'm not sure, but 4, 5, 6 people. There's something called the steering committee, and that's what I thought about. But there is one core team for Ember CLI, so this command line tool. There is a core team for Ember Data, which is the data library. There's a learning core team. I think there's an accessibility core team. So there are they are all on the web page, so I'm sure I missed not a lot of them, but I think I missed a few of them, probably. Yeah. I'm sorry. But
we'll link to it. That's no problem.
Yeah.
But so when it comes to adopting an RFC? Is it one of the sort of applicable core team that decides, or is it the steering?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not really sure about that. Yeah. I'm sure that if it's really related to one of the core team, let's say it's an accessibility thing, then that team has, their opinion is more important.
Oh, makes sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure about the details.
No. People can go read up. I bet there's thorough documentation about it.
And there is history. There at this point there have been several hundred RFCs, I would suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, I bet. That's also
that process is really old too. So it started, maybe when Ember was 4 or 5 years old. So probably 8 years ago.
Yeah, it's been going for a while.
Yes.
Okay, I guess we have like 10 minutes left. Whoa. What part should we? Is there any particular thing that we haven't covered that you would like to dive into?
Yeah, the Emberfest thing.
Yeah.
So as I said, I attended the very first Emberfest in 2013 in Munich.
Yeah.
And at the time, it was organized by a single person,
oh, wow.
a Norwegian guy. And he was great. And he kept doing it for a few years.
Wow.
And then I remember at one point, must have been 2018 or 17, the conference took place. So the good thing about it is that it moves, like it's a European Ember conference, but it moves every year. It's in a different place.
That's nice.
And so that year it was in my hometown in Budapest, Hungary. And so everything went well. We had the conference just like the others, and then at the end, he stepped up, Joachim, stepped up and said, "I'm resigning. I'm not doing this any longer." And everybody was, "Oh no," but everybody, I think, understood.
Yeah, of course.
It's just such a burden.
Yeah.
And then so that was in probably September or October that year. And EmberConf, so the big US conference, was in Portland the next March. And then like a fellow Embereño or some fellow Ember developer, Marco, approached me during that, or just texted me during that conference and said, "Hey, would you like to talk about, possibly, taking over the organization of Emberfest?"
Wow.
And I said, yeah, I definitely want to talk about this. And then, with him and at the time, 2 more guys, a little bit later, 3 more guys, we took over and we started organizing Emberfest ourselves.
Wow. Did you have organization experience before that? Or was
No.
Wow.
None.
Oh.
Yeah. Marco has the main matter, like this consultancy in Ember. So I think he had some.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, we kind of winged it. The first few years, it still feels a little bit like that.
Of course.
But it's been going ever since. We had to skip 1 year because of COVID.
Yeah, not much to argue about.
But I'm really happy that we did this, that we took over, and we had our 10th conference this year in Dublin.
Oh, nice. The
10th Emberfest altogether, and I think 7th for this team.
Oh,
and now we are 3 guys, Marco, Joska, and myself. But I really enjoy still organizing it, but especially having it. Just seeing all the people coming together, and it's very closely knit. Like we are usually around 100 people, so it's not a huge conference.
No, but it's still more than large enough to.
To organize.
Must be quite a lot of work involved, I imagine.
Yeah, I think it's in bursts. Like you don't have almost any work for quite a while, and then you have a lot. Of course, before the conference you have a lot, but there are some periods where you have a lot of work.
Is there anything particular that's the tricky part, so to speak, or is it different?
The organization?
Yeah.
No, I think I do possibly one of the easiest parts. I usually send out emails and social media and talk to speakers and help with the speaker selection, that kind of thing. Yeah, so I'm doing a lot of communication kind of stuff.
Lots of coordination, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. But I think other parts are possibly harder. For example, the venue, organizing the venue and the video setup, audio video setup.
Yeah.
The restaurants, we always have a dinner.
Yeah. And in a new place each year.
At a new place each year, finding the venue, talking to venues, finding the date. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I guess it runs on like corporate sponsorships or something like that too. Or can you cover it all by tickets?
Well, both. I think in some years, one of them is we have more revenue from, for example, ticket sales. Other years, it's more from sponsorships. But it's around 50-50.
Yeah.
As an average, at least, I think it comes down to.
Yeah. I feel like there was a thing, it must have been around the pandemic, right? Where I feel like I heard about conferences having a lot more trouble.
Oh, yeah.
Getting sponsorships.
Yes. Well, we absolutely experienced that. Yes. The last years, especially. Yeah, the last few years. Yeah.
But it still works out.
It still works out.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. We organize it through a non-profit, and so we want to get rich, organizing that conference for sure.
It all goes into the conference.
Yeah, exactly. Like on a good year, we break even. So
yeah. It's
but it's still so much fun doing it. Like just to see, how enthusiastic and happy the people are at the conference. Like there is a lot of, the vibe is very positive and very hopeful, and everybody's so energized. So to see that is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet. Do you have any horror stories of stuff that was extra troublesome or?
No, we might have been lucky, but I cannot think of anything which has been,
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Best possible answer, actually.
Yeah.
So when, what time of the year is it? Is it always the same, or does it move?
It's always the same. It's usually in September, like from in the second half of September. Usually, okay. Sometimes it shifted to October, like early October. But yeah, that's how we do it. I think the name comes from, Joachim, the original organizer, having it putting it in Munich in October or close to October. Yeah. So it's the Oktoberfest and Emberfest, but
it all makes sense.
Yeah. Well, the name stayed. I think it's a good name.
Yeah, it's a really nice name. It sounds cozier than many other conference names.
Yeah, I agree. I really like that.
It sounds like a really
short, to the point.
Yeah, social event. So I guess I just Google Emberfest, emberfest.eu. I got auto-completion.
Yes, that's us. Yeah.
Nice. And I feel like one thing that I've picked up sort of through developer communities in general, it feels like the Ruby and Ember communities, they have those really wide interests. There's a lot of nice people involved.
I'm happy that you say that, and I don't have to, but that has been my impression too. Like Ruby even has this slogan, Mats is nice, and so we are nice. But I found the same thing in Ember. Yeah. Totally. People are really nice to each other, and maybe that's part of why we didn't have any. I couldn't give you any horror stories.
Yeah, exactly.
The years.
we don't do horror here.
Yeah, exactly.
We're nice people.
We don't do drama that much.
No, exactly. Exactly.
There is enough drama in the JavaScript.
We can always go over there for a while.
Come back to contribute our drama.
Yeah, I guess we're about out of time. This was super interesting. Time flies.
Yeah,
I guess we'll have to do more episodes someday. There's probably a lot more to talk about.
I would be up for it.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Balint. This was excellent.
Yeah, thank you, Frederick. It was great to chat.
Frederick here from a different Monday morning in the recent past with one last-minute edition. Balint is writing another book, tentatively titled How to Become an Effective Software Developer, aimed at junior developers. And if you'd like to know more about that, you can surf over to devjournal.balinterdi.com and sign up to receive posts from the book and also, of course, news when the book is finished and published. Again, thanks a lot to you for listening and, of course, to Balint for taking the time to appear on the podcast. Take care. Tack för att just du lyssnar på Kodsnack. Om du vill stödja oss, varför inte tipsa en bekant om podden? Eller lämna en recension i till exempel iTunes eller något annat ställe där det går att sätta betyg på poddar. Du kan också stödja oss genom att köpa oss en kopp kaffe på Coffee, ko-fi.com/kodsnack. Alla pengar går direkt till att göra podden bättre och trevligare. Du kan också komma och hänga i vår Slack-kanal. Länk finns på kodsnack.se, precis som alla andra länkar och all annan info kopplat till varje avsnitt. Sist men inte minst finns det också en länk till vår Spreadshop-butik där du kan köpa tröjor och andra prylar med kodsnacktryck. Återigen, tusen tack för att du lyssnar. Vi hörs.
Let me put it this way, Mr. Raymer. The 9000 series is the most reliable computer ever made. No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information. We are all, by any practical definition of the words, foolproof and incapable of error.